to the full board. So first, I'd like to introduce you to the in-house marketing team. If you guys could all stand up. We've got all but one here. Thank you all very much. So this is the team that handles all of our in-house marketing efforts. We have media and PIO, graphic designer, video, corporate partnerships, and digital social media as well. The biggest thing that this team does is work on building relationships. We build relationships with reporters, working on earning media stories, social and digital media, talking to the greater audience and also to our riders. And we also build corporate partnerships, going out into the community, talking with business leaders about how public transit can be a benefit to them and to their employees. The planning team here at PSTA does a lot of listening, and that's really important for the marketing team because the planning team are the people that put together the projects that we get to market. So the planning team starts off by listening to riders, learning about their needs, going to rider town halls, going to group events, going to chambers and neighborhood interactions, really finding out what is it from the rider's perspective that they feel we can do better or differently. Once an area of need is identified, the planning team launches into product development, and they start that with even more public engagement, talking to the riders even more and the community. They work on partnership development, they work on cost analysis, ridership projections, and then they put together the actual details and parameters of the service or product that we'll be offering. So once they have all of those details, they kind of hand it to marketing in a package, and it's our job then to tell the story. So you take the relationships that we have built in the marketing group, you take the questions that the planning team has asked the riders, and you put them together, and we are able to tell the story. Now, we do that through a number of different ways, but regardless of the channel, we always look at our marketing and communications messages through three lenses. We're looking at, are we working on improving the customer experience? Are we building ridership? Or are we increasing community support? Now, sometimes there'll be multiple goals, but we always want to make sure at least one of those is the very deliberate purpose of our communications and marketing messages. So as we're telling the story, first thing we do is determine a particular product or service, who are we trying to target? We talk about next what, we explain the details of the service or product using easy to understand language and visuals, and then we decide which channel are we going to use to reach that target market. A great example is the TD late shift that we were all just talking about. When that project was developed in the planning department after much public listening happened, we decided that because the people that are eligible for the program were only current TD riders, that we would target our message very specifically to them. So we created a palm card that gave basic information about the project, and we handed it directly to people as they were picking up their bus pass at the terminals. And we did that for several months in a row to make sure we hit all of the people that were very eligible for that program. Now, past that individual projects and products as services that we market, there's a bigger story. There's the innovative programs, projects, and visions that PSTA is bringing to our community. So as part of our 2-year plan, we're going to focus on highlighting and promoting those projects. The biggest piece of that is content development. We want to make sure we're telling really good stories, that we're telling stories of riders, we're telling stories of services, we're telling stories of businesses that are benefiting from all of these things that we have to offer in our community. We're also making sure that we produce very high quality printed materials. So everything from a bus schedule to the one-pagers that you all are bringing with you when you go to Capitol Hill to speak on our behalf to legislators. We also add video into the mix. We have the bi-weekly Next Stop video series, which everybody seems to really enjoy. Great way to get our message out there, talking to riders and non-riders alike. And then we have promotional videos like this one pictured on the right here, which is promoting Direct Connect. We also have proactive media. So Ashley, who you all remember from earlier, works on developing really strong stories and bringing them to reporters to get interest in telling our story in the media. We also have a strong platform of, a strong cross-platform social media efforts so that we're building relationships with our friends online through social media, digital media, and our website. We also work with event organizers to promote public transit services to large-scale events. And we're working on expanding the very popular UPass program over into the corporate world so that we can have business partners join us in providing public transit services to their employees. Now, all of these things are happening all day, every day. The in-house team is working on these stories, talking to riders, listening to riders, talking about existing services. But we also have a bigger story to tell. So what we would like to do is engage FKQ, who you recall is our ad agency that we brought on board last year, to help us tell this modern transit story. PSTA really is defining what modern transit means in the transit industry and across the country. Brad gets calls all the time asking information about how our Direct Connect service is working. How did we partner with Uber? How did all those things happen? So out in the transit industry, PSTA is very well known. We want to bring that story back home and tell the people that live here in Pinellas County about that as well. We feel like we have a responsibility to tell the people in our community all of the great works that we're doing and how our services really do complement our community and make it a better place to live. The efforts we're going to talk about in a moment are going to integrate with all of the in-house efforts that are going on all of the time. So with that, I would like to introduce Elisa, this side, Elisa and Gina from FKQ, and they're going to run you through the details of this innovative awareness campaign.
Good morning, and thank you for having us. My name is Elisa DiBernardo. I'm the account director at FKQ, and I have with me Gina Klein. She's the media director. And we enjoyed this past year working with Brad and Cindy and the whole marketing team, so thank you so much for having us here today. What we are here to talk about is a component of the overall marketing plan that would allow us to tell our wonderful story of innovation, and it would allow us to open up communication channels, mass communication channels, to speak to all of the residents of Pinellas County, not only the riders that we currently target now. And so our campaign objective for this is primarily around building awareness for PSTA's innovative products and services designed to support economic vitality, thriving communities, and enhance the quality of life of the local community. And I read that intentionally because some of that language comes directly from your mission statement, so it's important when we put out a piece of communication like this that we always remember the core purpose of why we are here, what we're doing for the community. We also want to understand the consumer sentiment and kind of how what our place is in the current world. So we have a great opportunity right now because people are changing their minds about transportation and how they feel about getting from place to place. We know our millennials are much less interested in the mode of transportation and much more interested in how they're going to get from A to B quickly and efficiently. And we also know that we are opening up Tampa Bay to a more regional look. We have people crossing our bridges every day for work and play. And then we also know, and this is where the awareness piece comes in, that a lot of the residents of Pinellas County, unlike the folks sitting here today, aren't really aware of all the things that we're doing, and we think it's important that they are. So in addition to the overarching messaging that we've been talking about, we would have an opportunity to speak to what we consider some tactical messages, and this was getting right at the core of some of the programs that we're getting kudos for in innovation. So Direct Connect, Flamingo Fares, and even the Central Avenue BRT, TD Late Shift, and beyond. And now I'm going to pass it to Gina to take you through a little bit more of the details around the media and how we will target and how we'll look at channel selection.
Good morning. So when we're looking at our media plans, we always look at, are we talking to the right people at the right place at the right time? So let's kick it off with the right people. When we talked about really getting this message out to the community, we wanted to build an audience profile within our suite of tools at FKQ so we can efficiently spend the money. We looked at, is their residence Pinellas County, as well as do they own their resident? This really led us to look for target audience that are their tax-paying dollars are going towards our programs that we really want to communicate to them what we're doing with these new modern transit activities. We also layered upon that some business qualifiers. We can get as broad in this software for local data, qualitative data as we want to, or as defined. We looked at business professionals because we feel like they are leaders in our community, as well as they have employees that use our programs that we want to make sure they are aware of our benefits. Now, what might look odd here is we do have an X. We did take out those who were writers because, as we said, we're really looking at complementing what the in-house team is already doing and engaging and communicating these programs with the current ridership. So here in our target audience, we're really looking at reaching a larger community of Pinellas County. Now, we do look at the target audience profile. We won't spend a lot of time on this, but we do look specifically of who is this target audience in our marketplace. And then we hone that in to look at what is a media buying target for us, which we led to adults 25-54. But for media in these days, we don't want to have such a broad audience based on the details we shared of who we're targeting. So we look further into, this is the right audience for us, the target audience, but where are they consuming media? So when we are spending those dollars on media, we make sure we hit them where they're viewing. So here's a scale looking at media usage across this audience. We see at the high end using it over indexing compared to the general public, internet and outdoor, as they're spending a lot of time on the road and miles per week. We see on the lower end newspaper. Now, although TV on this scale does look it's on a little bit of the lighter side, it still is the highest reach, or it reaches the most people in our marketplace in a quick amount of time because it does have the largest viewership potential. Here's an idea of the marketing funnel. This is typically what we look at across all different categories in retail as well as consumer and transit. We see here on the funnel, three-step process, and we really want to concentrate on step one, which is awareness. The whole point of this program and speaking to this target audience is really getting their attention and awareness about this program. So that's really where we're focusing our media goals here, is on the awareness side. Now, eventually, through this 2-year program, we're going to push them through the interest funnel and then through the desired area. That's where we really want to start to persuade them to not only understand and talk about our programs, but be advocates about what Pinellas County is doing in modern transit. This is an idea on our flight strategy, but I'll take you right to the media calendar because this really lays it out, and we'll walk through this. We talked about the right people at the right place. Now it's the right time. We're proposing starting January 8th at the start of the new year. You'll see on the first line here zoned cable. As we said, cable and TV are highest in awareness and really capture that sound and sight. It is the most persuasive in that awareness time period. So we have zone cable here for Pinellas County, 30-second spots. We're really going to launch this at strong levels. You'll see that this is a total of 7 weeks throughout this 3-month recommended time period. We want to make sure we don't have unlimited budget, but when we are on, that we're on at impactful levels. So you'll see here it's 3 weeks in January, and then we pick back up in February and March for 2-week flights. While this is going on, we have a digital layer. We can get very targeted in digital as far as who we're talking to. And digital also lends the opportunity for the audience not only to see that, but click to learn more. And we take them directly to a site where they can learn more about the information and have a link to engage with us and have a further conversation. And then finally, the out-of-home, which is primarily the transit units. These are the buses you own. This would be wrapping the outside of the buses in the community. So of the 3 touch points there, the zone cable and the out-of-home, we would target routes as well as networks that are to our target audience. But by nature, these mediums will also be seen by those outside our target audience, so that would include riders. So we do see some spill of viewership there.
It's always important when we run these types of campaigns that we look at our KPIs, our key performance indicators, and make sure that the campaign was effective. So for effectiveness tracking for this particular campaign, since our objective is awareness, we would be looking to run a knowledge kind of survey that would test people's knowledge of PSTA's product services as well as their attitudes. We would run that survey prior to the campaign, and then after the campaign runs, we field that survey again to see what shifts we've had. So people that were saying, no, I've never heard of Direct Connect, are suddenly checking the box, yes, I have. And then we'll take a look at how the budget breaks down. We were provided a budget of $230,000 from PSTA, and not so surprising, the majority of that is going to go into buying media placements. As Gina mentioned, we have the opportunity to buy zoned cable, so we can target Pinellas County residents only, and we get a really great rate on that. Since you are a nonprofit, we do get a lot of deep discounts, which allows us to afford that. The majority of the media budget would be going there. And then we also have a budget for creative development and production of that 30-second TV spot and the digital banners and landing pages. And then a small budget to go against the tracking survey, which we would field to a research firm.
Thank you very much. So our next steps after today, with your approval, PSTA and FKQ will work together to start putting together the creative, telling the story, figuring out what are the pieces, what will it look like, what that storyline will be. We'll bring those creative concepts back to PSTA's executive staff and to the board in August for approval. September, we'll begin production, and as Gina said, we would launch that in January. So this is an action item. I am asking for your approval to enter a task work order with our existing contractor, FKQ, to develop and implement a 2018 innovative awareness campaign to tell the public about our services. The total budget, not to exceed $230,000, would be scheduled in the new budget. Some of those invoices would fall within the current fiscal year due to the when the production lines fall. Be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Cindy. And again, could you just tell me which committees have seen this already? I know the TRAC committee.
Yes, Ashley presented to TRAC committee on my behalf, and then last week we gave the presentation to planning and finance, and all three committees did recommend it for approval.
Okay, great. Commissioner Johnson?
Thank you. And I appreciate the previous presentations, and I think at each time I've talked about my concern really with the word marketing. And I really love the term innovative awareness campaign, because that tells our story to our riders and also to the other citizens of Pinellas County. Last week on Thursday and Friday, the Pinellas County Economic Development Group sponsored a leadership symposium, and it was a wonderful group, and I think wonderful seminar. I thank the county commissioners and commission chair Janet Long for that. I would highlight that one of the speakers was a lady, June Williamson, an architect, and she is talking about suburbia and reinventing and reinvigorating suburbia. One of the things that she mentioned that sort of surprised me, but she talked about in reinvigorating suburbia, there's a social stigma attached to buses. And she added, don't use the nasty benches with advertising on them as far as creating a good revitalized suburbia. And I guess I would ask you to, as you're developing the content of this, to look at those things that we do in our bus system or in other bus systems that would potentially change the social stigma associated with buses. Because they're really a good tool to use. So as you tell the story, I would make that suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Beavis?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm excited about this. Being in the media for 25 years, it's a very powerful way to reach a lot of people. And I remember having the conversation with Brad a couple of years ago, probably two and a half years ago, that it seemed like our media outreach was about defending the small, isolated little hiccups we had along the way, accidents or union issues or things like that. And Brad and I talked about, we do so many good things for the community, and both those that are riders and those that aren't riders, to make transportation better. So it's great to finally wave our own flag and let people know, as you said, throughout the country, they know about it. But I brought this up at our MPO workshop, that, we would like to be the ones that are being talked about all around the country, just like people talk about Tampa International Airport around the world. And so I think that this is a great way to reach out, and I like the tracking so that we find out if it's working. If you don't really have a way to measure it, you don't really know. So I'm excited about this. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Commissioner Barkley?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to put on the record that the Finance Committee did see this presentation last week. You folks did a terrific job, and we appreciated the chance to learn more about it. The committee unanimously approved this marketing plan to promote in the community PSTA's innovative programs, projects, and vision. FKQ's awareness campaign will help tell the story of how public transit and PSTA's innovations will positively impact our communities. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Eggers?
Well, first of all, I think it's, anytime you get a chance to talk transit, I think it's a good thing. I was really, they toned it down a little today, but in our finance meeting, it was a really awesome presentation. Not that it wasn't good today, but lots of energy that I can see in not only staff, but in you all. Something, frankly, I think that all of our transportation and transit conversations that we have need more of. But I like the idea of telling the story. I like the idea of reaching out and talking to our residents about how to move from point A to point B. Sometimes it is bus, sometimes it's Uber, sometimes, heck, last night I was watching something in Uber of the future talking about gliding through the city streets instead of, then they're going to roll that out in a couple of years. So as some of the commissioners and talk about technology changes happening by the minute. So lots going on, and I think if we can continue to look at funding sources to help us out here, I think the story needs to continue to be taken to our residents to engage them in dialogue, because it's really about their kids and their kids' kids. So what do we see? What do we think we're going to need? And so I think this is just a great piece, and I commend you and the energy that you all are bringing to the equation. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And I'd also like that great presentation. What you said, we have to tell our own story, or someone else will step up and fill that space quickly and tell the story for us. I'm looking at the budget recap, and 138,000 seems like it could be pretty reasonable. I mean, you can spend that money very quickly on media buys, and I'm interested in seeing what we can do in terms of social media. It seems like there's a lot more bang for the buck, and we can also, unlike a billboard or a magazine ad or a bus wrap, with social media, we can measure, impressions, click-throughs, shares, and I would imagine at some point maybe influencer marketing might be kind of like part of what we look at to, tell the story of PSTA. But I imagine that we'll kind of get into all of that with the effectiveness tracking piece of it. But I think the overall budget's very reasonable, because you could spend that very quickly. I mean, any of us who have run campaigns know how quickly you can spend money like that on direct mail or commercials on TV. So it looks like a nimble budget that covers a lot of areas.
Yeah, one of the things we had talked about too, from a creative development standpoint, when we get to that creative piece, is building an ad that can kind of be a shell that we can plug different messages in later. So if, later on we want to use this commercial again, most of the production work will already be done, and we can kind of pull it back out and freshen it and use it again. So we'll have more bang for our buck later on as well.
Great, thank you. Do I hear a motion?
Motion to approve.
Okay, great. So I heard a second over here. I think it was Commissioner Long. So we have a motion and a second to approve our marketing plan and task order. Did I take public comment? I see there's no public comment and no more questions. Okay, Rachel, would you prepare the machine for voting, please? PSTA commissioners, please cast your vote. Do we have a cell phone that's causing some?
Well, I think it's the.
Is that a hearing aid? We have a little bit of noise and audio dissonance going on. Okay, thank you. This motion passes 10-0. Cindy and your team, FKQ, thank you.
Thank you all so much.
Our next Our next part of the agenda is information items, 7A, and our fiscal year 2018 budget and personnel assumptions. Is Debbie coming up for this, or are you going to do that?
Madam Chair, I think in the interest of time, this is in your packet. The FY18 budget is under development now, and the Planning Committee has reviewed the financial assumptions related to our personnel expenses, our largest portion of the budget. You will be getting the full budget at the PSTA board at your June meeting. We will likely be back, well, I know we'll be back next month with some more budgetary information. But again, it's mostly background information, and I think in order to make sure that we're done in time for people who have to leave, we should get on to the next informational item, which is the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan presentation that Commissioner Johnson spoke about earlier.
Okay, and for the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, we have with us from Jacobs Engineering, Scott Pringle. Hello, Mr. Pringle.
Good morning.
I see you're leading this plan development, and Brad, would you like to make some other introductory comments before Brad starts? Before,
Yeah. Can you hit my?
yes,
Great.
there we go,
Thank you.
before Scott starts.
I asked Scott to come and present this study to the PSTA board because I thought it was important for you, the PSTA board members, as well as our Pinellas County community, to start getting engaged with this plan. As you know, Jacobs Engineering and Scott have been working on this for a year almost.
Not quite.
Under the direction, funded by the Florida DOT and administered by HART. But there really hasn't been too much discussion other than at the TMA meetings that meet, they don't meet every month. I think they meet quarterly.
Every other month.
Scott's going to tell you a good thing about this plan, that after 55 previous studies, we do not need a 56th. But we do need to move forward with identifying our community's top priorities, and that's what this plan will do. I'm going to, after our discussion today, I hope that some of you will provide me feedback on how you think Pinellas County in general and the board, PSTA board can get more engaged as this plan moves along. And then I'm going to put this on the agenda for our executive committee to have further discussion about how PSTA interacts with this plan moving forward. So Scott?
Excellent. Thank you, Brad. Like I said, good morning, everybody. Scott Pringle with Jacobs Engineering. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to provide you with the update on the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan, not a study, a plan. And again, I want to thank all the TMA members sitting on the PSTA board and for their leadership. We had a great meeting in April, and we continued to move forward and make a lot of progress. So the first thing I want to talk about is really the focus of the plan itself. If you think about what it takes to get a new transit project, especially a premium transit project, from conception to construction, you have to figure out what that project is or projects, figure out then how it can be funded, and then who owns and operates it. So the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan is primarily focused on answering that first element. What is the project or projects that we can begin developing a regional network such that, and have the information such that the region itself can then make a decision about funding and who's owning and operating it. And I do just want to make a comment, a minor correction to the description of the plan in the agenda. Like as this slide indicates, we are focusing on identifying the project, not on the funding or who owns or operates it. So as we go through the plan itself, we're going to have a lot of opportunities for outreach and collecting input. As Brad mentioned, both HART is administering the project, FDOT's sponsoring it, but we have been and will continue to meet routinely with agency staff from all three transit agencies, including your staff, HART staff and PCPT. We're meeting with the TMA bi-monthly to get that leadership and that consensus at major milestones. And then, just as Brad mentioned, we're going to continue to meet with the PSTA board committees as well as the other transit agency board representatives. And we have here as a quarterly basis, but what we're really targeting is that when we have that sort of coalition meeting between all three transit agencies, is that we're at a good point in the plan, that we have a lot of meat on the bones to have a good and frank conversation about how to move the plan forward. Of course, we're going to meet with a number of different agencies. We have a stakeholder group that's actually led by Ray Shermonte from the Tampa Bay Area Regional Transportation Authority, as well as the MPO directors. We've had really great input from the private sector. A lot of interest from a number of different major employers and business leaders in our community, and we're going to continue to meet with them throughout the development of the plan. And of course, we're going to always reach out to the public every step of the way. Touching quickly on our overall schedule, and you're going to hear this a couple of times, really the process, and it's both on the public outreach as well as the technical, is we're going to start off in step one talking about where are the top connections for our region. And then we take it a step further, talking about modes and what can operate on those connections, and then how those different projects could then be implemented. We're targeting approximately the start of that conversation of how to implement this regional plan in September, but we're looking at actually carrying that conversation through to January of 2018, having a draft, which we'll spend the entirety of January through October of 2018 vetting that draft with the community. This is a diagram, a schedule of all the public outreach activities that we are doing in 2017, and it includes a number of different things, whether the bulletins, we have a web site up and a web survey, a number of different workshops, community meetings, stakeholder meetings, and the alike. So our website is up and active. It is tbregionaltransit.com. Currently, we have a preference survey that's on that website, so I'd ask everyone to visit the website and participate in that survey. We have, to date, well over 400 people who've already taken the survey, and we'll keep that up, and what our intention is to always have either a survey or some sort of mechanism through the website where the public can engage in the plan development. So, it brings me to essentially where we are today in the plan, and before I start presenting this first sort of step and milestone, I want to reiterate, and I'll do this several times, that we have essentially three guiding principles to how we structure the development of the entire plan. First, we're looking for ways to identify projects that are most competitive for federal and state dollars. Looking for opportunities, and I'm going to talk about that. What are the opportunities to actually get a project implemented? We're always going to be forward-thinking and taking a cue from Mr. Miller and looking at the technology innovation, what's available today, and how that could actually serve us in our region in the future. But I think at the end of the day, the most important principle is that when we look at what can be competitive for those federal state grants, look at the technology, but number one, it has to serve Tampa Bay. It has to serve the needs of Tampa Bay. It has to serve our region both today and tomorrow. So we talked a little bit about being competitive for the federal and state grant dollars. There are a number of steps associated with each program that are outlined here. But bottom line, the most important thing is that we're leaving all options open. The federal process itself is a fantastic methodology. It's clear, it's concise, it's easy to follow. It represents decades of transit planning experience in our country. But the reality is, whether we do or do not actually use federal and state dollars to implement a project in our region, we're making sure that we have all options available to us as we move forward. This is quickly how the FTA, which is that federal program, rates projects in their capital investment grant program. I want to draw your attention to the blue portions of the pie, which essentially is how we are developing our evaluation plan for the regional transit feasibility plan. And you'll notice as we go through our evaluation criteria, they are consistent with what the FTA is looking forward into the future. So, again, We've accomplished our first major milestone in identifying where those top-performing connections are. And what we did is we looked at a number of criteria here. I'm going to talk about those in a little bit more detail. But again, number one, figuring out where those top connections are. The next step is we're going to start talking about what could serve those connections best, and then, of course, how we implement and improve those. And a little caveat, when we're talking about connections, the important thing to note is we are truly looking at connections between major destinations, and we still have opportunity to have conversations about actual alignments and how to serve those connections best. So when you look at this map here, to the left is job densities in the Tampa Bay metropolitan area. To the right is population densities. And the darker the colors, the more intense those densities. And I want to draw your attention to those regional activity centers that we know is really sort of the focal point for jobs and activities in Tampa Bay, such as Gateway, St. Petersburg, and Clearwater here in Pinellas. So I mentioned before those three guiding principles for our evaluation plan. Again, coming back to we're looking for those top performing connections that are going to compete the best for federal and state grant dollars. And those evaluation criteria are shown here on this slide. The ones that are actually in bold really represent the criteria that are, part and parcel to identifying a good transit project. And they are, who are we serving? How much activity, how many trips are we serving, and where are the people and where are the jobs? And that's what's going to give you a good indication of a high-performing transit project that's going to give you the ridership, that's going to give you the use, and that return on investment. So we started out, as I mentioned, this is a plan, not a study. There's been a lot of studies over the past 30 years. And the last round of long-range transportation plans had a number of different premium transit projects in it as a great starting point. And there's a lot of value to beginning with the long-range transportation plans, as they themselves are publicly vetted and publicly adopted processes and plans. So we started with these 67 connections, which covers the majority of the metropolitan area of Tampa Bay. And what we're finding from step one is this, that we have in those blue lines, what we're seeing is those top performing connections within our region that have the opportunity to look for federal state grant dollars. But then I also am going to talk about those critical regional connections in those green lines, as well as commuter services regionally that underpin that. Because as you can imagine, just as you look at the roadway network, transit is the same. And it takes an entire regional network or a vision to be successful. And none of these lines operating by themselves will perform without those connections, whether it's the green serving the blue or the orange serving the green and the blue. So I'm going to go through those top performing connections. This matrix here gives you a little bit of a detail. So any of the top performing connections ranked in the top 5 for specific criteria for at least 3 categories, if not more. And you can see the thresholds for getting into that top 5 group along the rows here shown in blue. A good example of that is that for a connection to get into the top 5 and activity centers served had to serve at least 3 regional activity centers or more. Now, when we look at trips to those activity centers, we're looking at connections that serve in 2040 over 625,000 travelers per day to those activity centers. So I'm going to walk you through in detail each one of those top performing connections. There's a lot of data here. You have it in your agenda packet. If there are any questions, I can come back to the data and we can revisit that here today or in the future. But I'll walk through pretty quickly, give you a flavor for why each one of these top performers are showing up on that network. So the first is connecting West Shore to Brandon, which connects through downtown Tampa, and it did very well both in the number of activity centers it serves as well as the number of trips it's going to serve, average mean per mile up through 2010 and 2040. The next connection is USF to downtown Tampa. Again, we're seeing a lot of those centers served, the trips or trips to those activity centers served, But popping up here in this particular corridor, you can see the population per mile also ranks in one of the top 5 of its peers. The next connection is Wesley Chapel to USF, Tampa, and we have St. Petersburg, but it's really Gateway St. Petersburg. And this corridor, admittedly it's a long corridor, but it really hits a number of those criteria, whether it's centers served, trips to those activity centers, jobs per mile, population per mile, opportunities for economic development, as well as even some of the amenities per mile. It does very well across our evaluation criteria. The next, which may be familiar to a lot of folks on this board, is the Clearwater to Gateway to St. Petersburg connection. It's something that's been studied for several years here in Pinellas County, and this corridor, of course, does very well when you're talking about the number of activity centers served, as well as the opportunities for economic development along that corridor. The last of the top 5 is connection from downtown Tampa to South Tampa. And again, here what we're seeing that rose this corridor to the top is the density of jobs per mile with those connections to downtown Tampa, but as well as the density of population per mile in all the neighborhoods serving in South Tampa. We do want to mention that part of that blue network is the Central Avenue BRT, or the PSTA BRT. For our purposes, we're not going to continue to focus on that in the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. The reason for that is it's already in the FTA pipeline. You're already in the Small Starts program. Our goal is to actually find the next regional project to get into the FTA Capital Investment Grant Program. So I think this is an opportunity to commend PSTA and actually looking at those regional top connections, and already got something in the pipeline and moving forward. So very exciting, absolutely. Some of the statistics related to that: population per mile on the BRT, opportunities for economic development, the number of amenities did very well for that Central Avenue BRT. But as I mentioned before, we had those 3 principles, looking at how we can compete for those grant dollars. But the last principle is, and we're going to do that throughout the development of the plan, is every time we look at how a project is performing, we always want to truth it to what's important to Tampa Bay. So what we did is, in this last criteria, serving that last principle, is again, we took that network, those top-performing connections, as well as those critical regional connections, and overlaid them across our activity centers and across our job and population densities in Tampa Bay. So again, in orange, we're focusing on the jobs. Again, the darker colors is the more intense job density. When we look at just those top-performing connections, by 2040, we're getting 3 out of every 10 jobs in the Tampa Bay area with just those blue connections. Now, when we add the green or the critical regional connections to that network, now we're serving 6 out of 10 jobs by 2040 in the Tampa Bay area within a half-mile walking distance. However, you do see we lose a little bit of efficiency, and the number of jobs that we're serving per mile goes down. Same exercise, but now let's look at the population side of this, the equation. When we look at just the blue lines, we're getting 2 out of 10 residents by 2040 with just those top connections. And again, you can see the number of residents per mile within that blue area. Add in those critical regional connections, we're getting half of the residents within a half-mile walking distance by 2040 to this regional transit network. And again, you can see that the per mile of population does go down. You do lose some efficiencies every time you expand coverage. Obviously, it's very important to make sure that we're always looking at how we serve people without cars. So when you look at residents who do not have cars by 2040, both the blue top-performing connections and the regional critical connections serve 6 out of 10 residents that don't have cars by 2040. So again, we come back to the importance of that regional transit vision, or that network. And as we move forward with the development of the regional transit feasibility plan, we're going to focus on those top 5 blue performing connections, and our goal is to identify a catalyst or a couple of catalyst projects out of those top 5. But the reality is that that does not preclude moving forward with projects in any of this network. And like I said before, it's absolutely critical for our region to look at this as holistically and know that none of these elements can stand alone and be successful. And just because the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan is moving forward with those blue lines doesn't mean that any one of the regional stakeholders shouldn't move forward with another regional connection that helps us grow this network, because ultimately that's how Tampa Bay will be successful. And in reality, all of our regional partners have a role to play as we move forward in the development of this vision. So our next steps, as I mentioned before, we're going to start talking about modes and the transit modes that can serve those connections. We're going to have some high-level cost conversations, as well as how easily it is to implement and how many people use those connections. And then again, I just want to conclude with reminding everybody that our job here is, what I've been tasked with specifically, is to identify the information of those projects, of that catalyst project or projects. Where can we start to build this network such that the region has the information it needs to then go ahead and figure out how that can be funded and who owns and operates those particular projects. And I conclude my presentation today, and I'll take any questions.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Great presentation. If you have a comment or a question, just please hit the button. Commissioner Johnson.
Thank you, and I appreciate having a chance to see this several times. Well, the one question that I wondered in looking at it this time is, for instance, you have the downtown to USF and the Wesley Chapel all the way to St. Pete connections, which is the same string but different segments of it.
Right.
And I'm wondering how you evaluate what to include in the core string and what to include in for instance, I don't think you have one that is downtown St. Pete to downtown Tampa. So why didn't you have that as one of your evaluation pieces?
Well, I think you hit on a very important point, and it's a great question. The fact that there are a couple of different ways that we can connect USF to downtown Tampa is going to be a big part of the conversation. And quite honestly, when we start getting to the point of identifying modes, so we are going to be looking at who's using that particular connection. Are they people going to work? Are they using it for other purposes? And what type of transit mode best serves that particular connection? We're going to be able to start identifying projects. And the reality is probably you wouldn't start with 2 connections between USF and Tampa. You might look for, if that were to be the catalyst project to rise to the top, one of those is moving forward. But you're right. I mean, we've got a discussion to have, and there's a conversation that needs to be had, is what's the best way to get people from USF to downtown Tampa, West Shore, and beyond. And then we have actually a similar situation in Pinellas County, where you look at the connection that connects Clearwater to Gateway to St. Pete. However, we also have that connection that's the same longer line that you mentioned that comes all the way through Hillsborough from Pasco to Gateway and St. Pete. So I think we almost have a similar discussion here in Pinellas when we're looking at how to get people from Gateway to St. Petersburg and across to Hillsborough. So.
Right, and just, I mean, the shortest connection would be Gateway to West Shore, but there's connecting two activity centers, but there's not much feeding into that.
Right. The bay itself is a blessing.
So I'm kind of wondering, how far do you stretch out from those 2 connections? So that's just kind of a question that I had. The other thing that I spoke of earlier, the wonderful Pinellas County Economic Development Symposium, and there was a lady that spoke specifically on community engagement, Kelly Morphy, and one of the things that she talked about was the very importance to engage the public, and engaging the public for the purpose of building social capital and for this project. You talked about talking to stakeholders, talking about business leaders, talking to having some website public, but I didn't see you really connecting with the grassroots users, potential users, and in some ways, this feels like the journey that we went on several years ago. And how do you build on that to get that involvement, to build the social capital, so we have a supportable plan instead of just a plan?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. The one thing that feels very different to me that I'm particularly excited about is we have a lot more of the private business leader interest in this effort. So I think to your point of building that social capital, looking at and getting input from those business leaders is something that's different this go around and incredibly important as we move a project like this forward. But actually, this is sort of hot off the presses. I just had a fantastic lunch yesterday with a member from the Young Professionals Association here in Clearwater, but they also have membership in Pinellas as well as Hillsborough and Pasco, and I'm in the process of trying to organize an opportunity which those young professionals will be able to weigh in on the development of the plan too, which I think speaks directly to your point.
That's incredibly important, and I think actually including our riders, the people potentially either that are using it now or those potential new riders for one of those corridors.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. Commissioner Barkley?
Thank you. Very, very thorough presentation. I appreciated all the graphics. That's very helpful.
Thank you.
Could you go back to slide 36?
Which slide is that? I don't have the number.
It's the vision slide.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, there it is. Two quick questions. One is, I noticed that you did not include the CSX line, which is probably the first transit line that we can get to quickly. That's not assumed in this program. And the second question is, one of our primary goals has got to be to get people out of their cars and onto transit of whatever form that may take, bus, rail, whatever. Do you include in your planning here park and ride or those kinds of areas where people can basically go from their house to a location to park their car and then get into the transit network?
Yes, I'll answer the second first. We're definitely going to look at park and ride opportunities, because in reality, I think when it comes down to how the general public sort of sees a service like this, it's more about the places. It's less about the lines. It's about the connections and the stations themselves. How do I get access to their service? Is there the amenities there, the park and rides, the ability to park? But then we have, the ride-sharing opportunities that are occurring, making sure that those have connections as well. So absolutely. To your first point about looking at the CSX, we actually are identifying the CSX corridor as a regional connection here, a critical regional connection in the green lines, and it includes all the subdivisions to the west of Ybor in our region. And actually, two of our top performers could be perceived. Again, we haven't picked actual alignments yet, but one of the Tampa to USF is actually looking in the proximity of that CSX rail corridor. So we're definitely looking at it. We've actually had opportunities to have an informal conversation with CSX. We'll continue to do so moving forward. And the reality is, if we're looking at a portion of that CSX corridor, do we need to consider the purchase of the entire alignment? I think those are conversations yet to come.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Eggers?
Yeah, thank you. I actually wasn't expecting you to be here today. I didn't see it on the agenda, but thank you for being here and sharing the story. I was looking at your population. I guess it's the number, page 34, population density, and I've often thought that, as far as Pinellas County goes, and MPOs, one of their key components is access to beach. So the movement from the beach across State Road 60 to the airport is really a primary. The traffic, 19 obviously going north and south to me is a primary. I've never fully understood, and I know this isn't what your job was, to identify downtown Clearwater to Gateway as one of our be-all and end-all routes. So I just think, I'd just like to have some more conversation about how we provide input to elevate importance like the beach to airport transit. It's really becoming more and more critical.
Right.
as we move forward as a, you talk about low-hanging fruit to success. That's one that I think we really need to explore more. And clearly if you see the population centers going north on 19, I
Right.
mean, you can look at the traffic, it's just amazing.
Right.
To me, that's much more critical, and I know, again, you're pulling studies together for this plan, so
Right.
I get that. But, so that was really the only other thought I had was on the reaching out, the public engagement, and some of the business leaders that we're talking to. I think it'd be awful, if we could reach out and tell them that if they want to have the conversation at their offices with their employees.
Right.
I mean, I think that would be a great opportunity for you to go in and have that conversation,
Yes.
Again, getting back to that marketing plan that we heard earlier and the energy that's there, somehow we've got to engage and energize people to conversation, and I think that's a great way to do it. They're kind of captured at their work, but getting some feedback from them. How would it be better for me to get from Countryside here? Tell me,
Yeah.
get some of that, anyway, just some thoughts. Thank you.
No, thank you, Commissioner. And honestly, because of your leadership and the conversations at the TMA, one of the questions that always sort of keeps coming up is exactly who are we trying to serve with this regional transit plan? And you're going to see over the next month or so, we're going to really dig deep on that conversation. And I think what you're going to find is that the most important thing we could do, at least at the onset of developing this network, this vision, identifying that catalyst, is providing better access to jobs. So your point is a critical component of that, reaching out to the employers and asking them what would it take to give you better access to your job.
Thank you. Commissioner Long?
Yes, I've heard your presentation at TMA, and it's refreshing to hear it again. I have a comment I want to share with you, and then a question. Just yesterday, I met with the president and CEO of a major corporation that takes up an entire building right off 19 in Clearwater. And that gentleman started his company 5 years ago with 5 employees, and today has hundreds of employees working in his company. It's one of the fastest growing companies in America. And I was shocked to learn that the largest majority of his employees in that building, he owns the whole building, I think it's 6 or 7, maybe 8 stories high, work in Hillsborough County. And I am stunned that after all these years, we have yet to figure out an easy way to cross the bay. The Howard Franklin is a nightmare and is getting to be at the point where you take your life in your hands getting on there. There's 2, 3, 4 accidents every single day. So how do we speed that up? And like to that question, where are we going with the T-BARTA bill?
I don't feel comfortable answering that.
I knew you were going to say that. It's such a cop-out.
But I will say that, I think the timing of the development of this regional transit feasibility plan is excellent, because whatever that entity is, remember I had that slide about we're figuring out what the project is, and it's up to the region to figure out who owns it and who funds it. I hope that whatever the outcome of session is that the work that we're doing here will be a great platform for that entity to move forward. And I'd be happy to give them everything that we've done to date.
So Commissioner, Chairman, may
Yes.
I
Yes.
follow up? Have you shown this presentation to Senator Brandis and Senator Lee?
We have not.
You might want to do that since they sabotaged our bill.
Okay.
Thank you.
Scott, thank you so much for this
Thank you.
presentation. It certainly, this area, when it comes to transportation and transit issues, we are rich in lessons of what not to do. But we're also rich in lessons of what we can do, and there's certainly lessons from South Florida and Orlando where we recognize that once a metro area coalesces around a catalyst project, that we do get the funding for major transportation and transit. And you gotta get everybody together, you gotta get everybody, and like people like on this board, to really, attack this plan with a spirit of regionalism and cooperation. And having said that, I would have to say, if for some reason the Catalyst project that emerged here eventually, like if it didn't include my city of St. Pete, I might get a little lump in my throat and find that it would be kind of a challenge to cheerlead a project that didn't include my particular exact city.
Yes.
But that would be ignoring the fact that we've got to do everything that we can do to help keep the companies and employment centers that we have here now, as well as to attract new ones. And that definitely benefits all of us, whether one of those green, blue, or orange lines go right by, our city or not. We have really got to look at the fact that in our region nationally, we have the longest commute in a car for the poorest people. And our CEOs know that, and the CEOs that look at this region, they know it too. And that really puts an urgency into getting behind a regional solution and doing this right and being smart about it. So thank you for your presentation to get us started on that foot in the right direction. And yeah, I would like to see cooperation between our state senators that represent us as well. Okay, thank you. So I'm being.
Is that a motion?
This was an so we're going to, the executive committee will continue to discuss this and look at ways that how, what's the best way for the PSTA board to stay engaged on this issue. It could be through the executive committee or the planning committee, and providing regular updates to the board so that we're absolutely sure that we stay on the front line and engaged with this. So I know that we're about to lose some of our board members, so we want to kind of get through these next parts kind of quickly. So our next section is reports and correspondence. Brad, could you just update some of the things that are included in our board packet?
Yeah. Okay, in your packet is the monthly performance stats on ridership and all things. You also have a quarterly report in there that lists all the contracts that PSTA has. In addition to just being interesting, you might note if you work for any of those companies, that might be a conflict, but I don't think any of you do. And third in there is something that I hoped was going to be in your packet last month, but we failed to do that, is the proposed vision and mission statement revisions that you started at your January workshop, and then staff has sort of refined through our business scorecard project that we're working on. This will be on the agenda for our next executive committee, and then if any of you have any feedback on the emerging wordsmithing of the vision and mission statements, smaller, shorter, more concise than our current one, let me know, or the executive committee will make a recommendation, I hope, to your May board meeting. Speaking of the May board meeting, we will hopefully have a relatively efficient board meeting with action items, and then have our PSTA 101 session, which I'm excited about. A number of board members, especially new board members, have asked for more background information about what's going on at PSTA, who works at PSTA, so they try to get familiar with some of our management team and the folks you see making presentations. We will include a little mini tour, or we'll give parts of the 101 course in different locations around the facility. Like Henry will talk about our buses in the maintenance area. So get ready for that. I wanted to highlight a couple of meetings coming up, and we'll send you official invites if you haven't gotten one already. On Wednesday, May 10th, you'll be invited to a launch, a little reception for our launch of our new website. That has been in the works for a long time, and FKQ has been working on that. So stay tuned for that. That'll be exciting, and I think will really benefit to our riders with easier information, because it's going to be designed to be specifically designed for mobile phones, unlike our current website, which you have to really zoom in. And all of our riders, of course, not taking most of them don't have a PC up at the bus stop, wondering when their bus stop is coming. They need to know on their phones. And then May 12th is an important meeting, and I hope that many of you have on your calendars over at St. Pete College at the Epicenter. I think the title of it is called the TMA Best Practices Workshop. It's at 9 o'clock, but it is the kickoff meeting to this discussion of a regional MPO. It's not really, it's not sponsored by PSTA, it's sponsored by the MPOs, but it's something I know that they've invited, I think, most of you, certainly the folks that are on the MPO have been invited, and I know a lot of people are going to, but it will be a good discussion, regardless of what the legislature ends up doing on the T-Barter bill, about how the region moves together from a planning perspective, and I wanted to highlight that. I will be heading to Daytona for our Florida Public Transit Association's annual statewide rodeo, bus rodeo, and maintenance rodeo, and the board meeting of the association is meeting in Daytona tomorrow. And PSTA has a maintenance team and a winner of our local rodeo who will be competing in that. As was mentioned before, we are getting calls and interest in our innovation all around. I will be going to Pittsburgh next week to a National Association of Counties forum that's there to talk about our Uber Direct Connect program. And then internationally, I will be going to Montreal to talk about it again. More locally, I've enjoyed going to our fine cities of Tarpon Springs and Seminole recently with Commissioner Barkley, and unfortunately, Old Bar met the same night, so Commissioner Beavis didn't join me, but we also have making the tours to City of South Pasadena, Bel Air, Kenneth City, Bel Air Bluffs, and St. Pete Beach coming up, so look forward to that. Finally, of course, as you all know, today is Administrative Professionals Day, so I want to give a great shout out to Rachel and Clarissa for keeping this thing going and almost making our 10:30 time. Thank you.
Yes. Great, thank you. Thanks, Brad. So do we have any board member comments before we adjourn our meeting? Okay, seeing none, our next meeting is here on May 24th at 9 a.m. Thank you very much, and we'll adjourn our meeting.
You're welcome.
Well, that is what it is.
Oh, yeah.
Center Lab, approved the T-Barter. Still, the branch. Yes.